Have you ever thought about the right to be cold? The phrase, the title of Sheila Watt Kluche's memoir, was coined to reflect the Inuit struggle to preserve their way of life in the face of climate change. It's a powerful concept and one that challenges what we normally think of as rights, especially since such a right by necessity is more than an individual one or even a communal or cultural right, but ecological, hinging on protecting the Arctic climate. I read The Right to Be Cold as part of a book club focused on indigenous writers. It's a story of a woman that few Canadians know about. And it's a shame because Sheila Watt Kluche is a force. As David said in the intro to the excerpt we just heard, she was international chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, which connects Inuit from Canada, Greenland, Chukotka, Russia, and Alaska, so they can speak with one voice on critical issues like the warming of the Arctic. She helped bring about a so-called David and Goliath human rights claim against the US government for the impacts of climate change on the Inuit. Now, sadly, the co-nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize in the end was split, and it went to Al Gore and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. But as Sheila Watt Kluche graciously put it, the planet was the real winner. And so it was a victory for all of us. Climate change champions received the prize, and so it was a win for the Arctic and for us Inuits. Now, I'm not sure I would have been quite as gracious as that had happened to me, but that's a cultural reaction. I'm shaped by a society that values individual success much more than communal achievement. It's how I find my place. Most of us seek cues from others, often gauging success on paychecks and on what we can buy with them. And that aspect of our society, in large part, caused what Cloutier spent years fighting against for her people. The economic choices of the South, shaped by a more individualistic culture than that of the Inuit, has meant increasing greenhouse gas emissions despite us knowing about the impending harm for decades. And this is felt profoundly in polar regions which are warming twice as fast as the rest of the world. But rather than pull back in alarm, executives in many corporations, energy ones especially, Canadian ones included, saw an advantage. Less sea ice means easier resource exploration. So what that lack of sea ice means? Higher storm surges, erosion of coastlines, loss of permafrost and therefore sinking houses, unreliable routes to hunting areas, less dense snow needed to build igloos, which is a safety issue. The threat to an ancient culture radically impacted in just a couple of generations. And that's what Cloutier was fighting. And yet, as we heard, she framed it not as striking out as a fight, but as an ancient people with a deep sense of place, knowing who they are in relation to each other, as well as to the animals and plants, to the land and sky and sea, to the snow and the ice that both defines who they are and who they still want to be. This ancient culture reaching out to a younger culture that has become disconnected from the environment, in which people see themselves as dominant. And even then, that dominance is mostly by white settlers. Racialized people becoming just commodities be exploited like the animals and plants and water and land and sky. Sadly, I think she's right. As a society, we have lost our balance. We've lost a true sense of our place. And this has been developing for generations. After all, Jesus' nation faced this just reality. Their traditional territory was a source of revenue for rulers in Rome, their land to be exploited and their people considered expendable. This situation was seen as having a spiritual and not just a social impact, expressed in Mark's gospel in people being bound by illness, even bound by demonic possession. So, what did Jesus do? He healed, he liberated, he set free. In this, he restored balance, reclaimed harmony, helped people find their place in God's shalom rather than in an exploitative system. In his first healing in Mark's gospel, Jesus frees someone of an evil spirit. He muzzles the spirit, saying, "Be quiet." And the people were astonished, responding, "What is this? He commands evil spirits, and they obey him." Fast forward to today's gospel, and in response to his disciples' cries, he muzzles the storm. He says to the water, "Be quiet." And the disciples, astonished, say in response, "Who is this? He commands the elements, and they obey him." Jesus' ministry of healing and liberation was larger than any one individual, directed not just to his friends and family, not even just to his community, but to the nation, to the foreign occupiers of his nation, and beyond that, to the world and the environment itself. Jesus did this because he had a keen sense of place. Unlike the disciples, Jesus slept during the storm. He was in harmony with the elements and rooted in his relationship with the one he called God. And that is what he wanted for all of us. His whole ministry, calling us back to see our place, is not in wielding power over others. Our place is not in trying to control or commodify the earth, the plants, the animals, people, but to look after each other, human and non-human alike. This means looking after people, nations, tribe that we see as other, people that we've never met, and places that we've never seen. And again, this is something that Sheila Watt-Kluche understood. During the United Nations negotiations, our Canadian government denied her request to include the impacts on the Arctic in their remarks about climate change. So she reached out to another body of people, Pacific Islanders, who knew too well the connection between warming poles and rising seas. Of course, they talked about the Arctic because there's no denying that we're all connected. And so also responsible for each other's well-being. We don't live that, and as a consequence, like the disciples, we are caught in a storm of our own making. But I have hope. I believe that as Southerners living in a society shaped by settler ancestors, we will heal. We can be set free if, like indigenous relations, we look to the needs of the whole rather than gauging our place based on individual and material success. And when we do that, the earth will heal as well. Now, this happens, well, it won't happen if we just change our minds. I really believe that we need a change of heart. So, what a gift that indigenous wisdom keepers are willing to share knowledge and to offer spiritual help. I saw this enacted in the opening worship of General Council 43 in 2018. Beginning of the General Council, a traditional elder stood outside of the assembly area, standing between the indigenous representatives of the territory and a delegation of the United Church, asking for permission to enter into the space so that we could meet. But before the moderator and general secretary and the other representatives could enter into the space, the elder gave them cloths so they could spiritually wipe their eyes, clear their throats, cleanse their ears, so they could see themselves clearly and others with respect. So they could speak with caring and listen with a desire to understand, so that we could meet together in a good way. I cried in that moment, wondering how things would be if settlers and missionaries had sought permission when we first came to this land, had promised to see, speak, and hear with love, had considered the needs of the whole and not just individuals. I began today speaking about the right to be cold, and it's more than a right for the Inuit. It's about preserving a cold Arctic, essential because we're part of a larger connected system. I pray that we can reclaim this important teaching, and so we'll find once again our place in God's shalom. May it be so.